Me? You. Boa tarde. Good evening. Just a few words to express our gratitude. Claire Fox and Angus Kennedy visited us in June and talked about the Battle of Ideas and their project to organize a satellite event in Lisbon. The day after our meeting, they wrote me from London saying that they would like that CultureGest will be their partner in this event. And we began working together on it. Thanks for choosing us. Thanks, Claire, for chairing the debate. Thanks, Angus, for being in the panel. Thanks, Rob, for your collaboration and introduction you made. Thanks, Professor Augusto Mateus and my friends Miguel Wandschneider and Jorge Silva Melo, who accept our invitation to start the battle. Thank you all who came today to participate in this debate. The purpose of this event is for you to express your opinion, your doubts, your perplexities, with an open mind and without fear and prejudice. The issue, just what are the arts good for, seems to me a crucial one when we think or act in the cultural field. For artists, politicians, curators, artistic directors, cultural journalists, cultural agents, but also for the public and everyone interested in cultural matters. We don't have, in my opinion, here in Portugal, the habit to discussing ideas with an open mind, trying not to persuade, but to understand the other's reasons and express our point of view. May this event be a little contribution to an urgent debate about such an important issue. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Welcome to CultureGest, and thanks for coming to this evening's debate on just what are the arts good for, as Miguel has already introduced. My name is Robert Klaus, and I am just going to take a few moments to introduce some of the background and context for this event this evening, before I'm going to hand over to the chair, Claire Fox, who will take it from there. I just wanted to thank Miguel Lobo-Antunes and CultureGest once again for setting up this event, and along with the Institute of Ideas, putting together such an impressive panel for this evening's discussion, who Claire will introduce to you properly, more fully in a second. I also wanted to thank the British Council of Portugal for their sterling support, and Hendrix Gin for supplying the drinks for the reception afterwards. Tonight's Battle of Ideas Satellite is the first outside Britain of the 2010 festival. It is one of 25 satellite discussions taking place across 3 continents during October and November, including New York, Berlin, London, Chennai, Mumbai, Frankfurt, Oslo, Stockholm, Budapest, and of course Lisbon. And there will also be quite a few across the UK as well. This will lead up to the Battle of Ideas Festival weekend, which will take place in London on October 31st and the 30th. The satellites, which of this is a part, were started 3 years ago to make sure the Battle of Ideas spirit of expanding the boundaries of public debate went beyond simply a weekend in London, the one which takes place wherever there is a public audience hungry for no holds barred and free-thinking debate on the key ideas of our time. For those not familiar with the Battle of Ideas, it is an annual festival of debate taking place in London each autumn, committed to robust and open discussion about the key ideas of our time. Now in its 6th year, the Battle of Ideas 2010 features over 300 international speakers and 70 debates discussing everything from the future of engineering to why does history matter, from the role of scientific evidence to the politics of fashion, and much else that you can read about in this brochure, which you can pick up at the end. I had the privilege to be on the Battle of Ideas committee for the last 3 years, although my involvement with the Institute of Ideas goes back some time beyond that, and was instrumental in setting up something called the Brighton Salon. The Brighton Salon is a forum conceived in the spirit of openness and critical discussion, based on the south coast of England, which has been running for 3 years now. And now, in the spirit of this, in Lisbon, we're hoping to set up a similar Lisbon Salon, which, if you want to hear about, I won't detain you too much telling you about that now, but if you want to hear about that, you can come up and talk to me or my colleague Miguel Saya at the end. And we'll both be very happy to talk to you about that and also about more Battle of Ideas events. Okay, thanks for your attention. I think I'm now just going to hand you over to Claire to introduce just what are the arts good for.
Thank you very much, Rob. I'd just like to say thank you to Rob, particularly, because when the Institute of Ideas decided that we would go international, we hadn't thought of coming to Lisbon, if I'm honest. And it was Rob that suggested it and invited us to come here, and if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be here. And then also to Fatima from the British Council, who I met in London at dinner, who then said, you've got to come, you've got to come. And we came, and then we didn't know if anyone would want us. And then we met Culturguest, and we knew straight away that we had a partner we could work with. So I really would like to thank Miguel for working with us on this project, and to him and all his team here, Philippe and all the team here. They've been fantastic partners. Okay, a couple of things, because we're new to town. Forgive me. First of all, forgive me my accent. Even in the UK, people think I sound peculiar. I also have got terrible pronunciation. And so any attempt that I will make to introduce people will go horribly wrong. If you could just bear with me and forgive me. And I'm also incredibly nervous as well. The Institute of Ideas has been going for 10 years. And what we like to do, and what we started to do in the UK, was to open up discussions and debates to a public audience. And not have lectures as such, but really to try and grapple in the public square with some of the difficult issues of our time, but also to be a little bit irreverent, to challenge some orthodoxies, to shake things up a bit intellectually, to ask some awkward questions. And one of our mottos is free speech allowed. And the purpose of that motto is to encourage the audience to participate. So the format for this evening is that all of my speakers, even though they're incredibly eminent and have hours worth of ideas to share with you, can only speak for 5 to 7 minutes each. And I have to then be a little bit irreverent and stop them if they go on. We'll then have a lively argument on the panel. We might all get on, but I doubt it. And then we'll expand that argument out to the audience. And as Miguel said when he started, it's very important that people hear that you just put your hand up and say what you're worried about, what you think. It's not a question and answer to experts. It's a genuine, all of us as intelligent members of the public trying to get to grips with one of the most important issues of our time. We know that the backdrop to this discussion on the arts is the current financial crisis and the pressure it puts the arts under to justify itself. And I think we have to just, before I ask the speakers to speak, just bear in mind what's at stake here. There's an EU, a European Union Green Paper that argues at the moment that the cultural and creative industries are going to be the main driver of jobs and economic growth in the future period. That this is going to be where we get our spur for innovation, and that it's one of the places that we can expect GDP to grow in the arts and cultural sector. And if you are interested and passionate about the arts, you might feel very flattered that suddenly the arts are going to solve the economy and the economic crisis. They're going to regenerate countries everywhere, and regions and cities are going to come alive with artistic endeavour, and money will be made and jobs will be created. How exciting is that? But is it remotely true? Is it, for example, maybe a sign of desperation on the side of the arts that they go down that road? Or is this actually the only argument that we can use these days to secure funding and support for the arts? That's what's on the table. And at the moment in the UK, as we speak in fact, there is a massive row going on about how the arts should argue for themselves in the public sphere. What should we say about what makes the arts matter. So that's why we've invited our panel together. Let me introduce them. First to speak will be Jorge Silva Melo, who is the Artistic Director of Artistas Unidos, where he has premiered his own plays, and plays by Sarah Kane, Harold Pinter, Brecht, David Harrowett, Enda Walsh, Anthony Nielsen. I've chosen just those because I could pronounce them just about. Many more, of course. He's also, I mean, I know that he's really, really famous, and I don't need to introduce him, but I feel better if I do. He's also directed a number of feature films and documentaries on Portuguese painters. Is a widely writer, a critic, an essayist, and, of course, a playwright. And it's a real privilege to have you on the panel. Next up to speak will be Professor Augusto Mateus, who is the former Minister of the Economy, Industry, Commerce and Tourism, and former Secretary of State for Industry as well, and author, most importantly, of the report, The Cultural and Creative Sector in Portugal. He is Professor of Economic Policy at the School of Economics and Management, ISEG, at UTL, and he's also been President of the Institute of Advanced Business Training, and now he runs his own company. And then we have Angus Kennedy, both my colleague at the Institute of Ideas, also the chair of the Institute of Ideas Economy Forum, who is coordinating all of the international battle satellite programme this year. Angus has a degree in classics from Oxford, a degree in linguistics from the University of London, a Master of Phil in artificial intelligence from Dundee, and that's just him showing off. Actually, the main thing that he is that he's a public intellectual who likes to stir things up, and hopefully that's what he'll do tonight. And then finally, Miguel Wandschneider, who is Curator of Contemporary Art here at Culturgest, our host, where Miguel has been developing a programme strongly focused on solo exhibitions and international artists, in most cases unknown to local audiences, and making those popular in the public sphere, as well as, of course, supporting Portuguese artists. And his many years as a curator and his mission, which he describes as to expand the horizon for the reception of contemporary art in Portugal, I think makes him ideal placed to answer our very important question, just what are the arts good for? So can we just give a big welcome to all of our panel, first of all. And Jorge, if I could just ask you to kick us off.
7 minutes.
7 minutes, starting now.
Thank you. So the nice thing I liked about the title of this panel is art is not in the singular but in plural. What are arts for? Because they are different. And you can very easily understand what architecture is good for, and it's more difficult to say about contemporary music. So they are different, and their history is different. And there also you can separate the arts from the past and the arts from now, and the past finished yesterday. It's very different, the arts that finished yesterday and the arts that are being done today. The arts from the past, they started when the object itself stopped being transparent and started to being opaque. That's what Melo so wonderfully wrote in Le Musée Imaginaire. When the object doesn't mean anything, nobody is going to pray to the resurrection of Christ, even in the Vatican museums. When the object is no more the object it was meant for, and it starts his new life of being opaque, it's when it starts its new life of being useless, art starts. That's what Melo said in Le Musée Imaginaire, and it's a wonderful discovery of modern times. Also, you can understand that nowadays you can have exhibitions about Vespa when nobody can walk in Vespas in Rua Augusta, where the museum Mude is. So it's when Vespa are useless, and there's no Audrey Hepburn to wear these edit head costumes on Vespas, that you can start looking at Vespas as if they were useless and as if they were art. Ramon Gómez de la Serna, a wonderful Spanish writer, wrote once everything about Madrid, which is a town I like very much. everything in Madrid finishes, which is very important, finishes in Museo del Prado or in Rastro, the flea market of Madrid. So for Ramón Gómez de la Serna, art, he was very critical about it, is a trash that can be elegant or for the elegant classes. It's trash class A, even if in the Rastro they are trash class B. Useless things. So the first definition I would say is that art starts when it's useless. In a certain way, it's born when the use is dead. A mask of an African tribe, when it starts being artistic, when its use is dead, is finished. And even you can start saying that lots of wonderful works of art that we would nowadays consider were put simply in the rubbish. So, and dead objects that are no more useful, are reborn as an artistic object. It's when the bourgeoisie of the Second Empire in France is dead that we can look at Labiche. In his lifetime, Labiche was only an entertainment writer. We don't see anymore the Duchess or Grand Duchess who were going to see Labiche in his time, when he was not considered an intellectual or a good writer, and now we can consider him a genius portraying the Second Empire. It's when the songs are no more useful to flirt or to kiss the most beautiful girl in the school year, that they are going to be performed in the concert rooms. It's when you're not believing in Christ that you can see the Passion of Bach in the concert hall. So it's when it's useless. It's also when they are no more useful to glorify Stalin that the paintings of Guttuso, a Stalinist, or Fougeron, another Stalinist, can be seen at the Tate Modern, which is not supposed to be a Stalinistic building. Art is the word that baptizes some objects whose originality nowadays we now consider this object original. It doesn't mean that it is original. It's now we consider it, and we call it artistic. They serve the actual art, because they create models and counter models of the actual work of art. And we are inventing the past of art in each historical moment. It would also be very interesting to make the history of the... Como é que se diz o não exposto? A cave of the non-exhibited in the museums. So, I brought you a photocopy. So some of you can understand it's simply pub, it's an ad. It's Hotel du Mar. What is this used for? You can understand it's supposed to be for happiness. This ad wants you to pay something and be happy, simply. But you can understand that this ad cannot be born without Mondrian, which was useless. But this publicity image is impossible without the paintings of Mondrian. And Mondrian is not possible without the boogie woogie, without the electric lights of New York. So you can understand, and this image, you can know that this was criticized in the Jacques Tati films. You can see that even if Jacques Tati didn't go to Hotel du Mar in Sesimbra, in Mon Oncle or in Playtime, he looks at this reality that was born in Mondrian and in the Boogie Woogie, and before. So, art works like the waves. It's very piroso, but I believe it. Like the waves, they go, they are useless, but you can use them. The waves themselves are not, they serve nothing, but they can produce electricity and surfing and tourism and like art. It develops itself, it goes and goes and goes, and reborn.
And finally.
Sorry?
And finally.
Finally! I am... You can, nowadays, but the other definition, the past art is one thing, but nowadays, like Fabrice Del Dongo in La Chartreuse de Parme, he was in Waterloo, but he couldn't understand what was passing. He didn't know. So, that's the problem of what is contemporary. The art of today, we cannot understand what is going there, and what is useful, what is it for. And it's a bet, a pari. You can only bet that it will come something from nowadays. Even in the 30s, nobody knew about the Livre do Desassossego. It was not yet published, but it was from those times, or from the 80s when it was published. So what is being done in contemporary art, we don't know. We need it, that it will be our future. But we don't know what is it. That is the definition of present days. Present day is the day we don't know what is passing. That's why we ask it in the tally, que se passa?
Thank you. Okay, great start. Lots of things I want to argue with you about, as well as agree with you on. So consequently, that's a good start. Be thinking of all those arguments you're going to throw at the panel. Professor Mateus, Augusto.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. For various reasons, Culturgest is a very interesting institution and initiative. It's a pleasure to cooperate. The relations between Portugal and United Kingdom are relevant. They were more relevant in the past, but we have a British ambassador which is doing a very good job here. So it's also a pleasure to cooperate in that revival of the relation between our countries, and the theme it's a crucial thing. I don't like the title. I would like something like playing with ideas. It's more up to date than the battle of ideas. But I understand the idea of battling, and playing we must be competitive and we must battle. But playing is, for me, the good approach. Hearts in the plural is it's of course well done. I will make my contribution coming from what for the lovers of arts are stupid things, like and if money was as institutional, as creative, as complex as arts, money is not money. Money is the more complex institution of our society. We don't have material money. We have immaterial money. It's something we are confident about or less confident about. This crisis nowadays for us Europeans is also a crisis of confidence on euro. Money is not the material thing. We have a lot of artists, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of employees that drawn on public resources, drawn on taxes paid by everyone. The access, the distribution of public money is a battle. A very complex and opaque battle. It should be more transparent and less complex. So my point is, you began with something very, very important. What if the arts, our creative abilities, would be crucial for the future of the world and the future of Europe? My answer is yes, they will be. Why? Mainly because when we have to choose about having a lot of power and no idea at all, or a lot of ideas and no power at all, I think the majority here would choose ideas, not power. And basically, what are the 2 or 3 conclusions of the study we refer that are useful for this battle? First of all, if you look at arts, cultural industries, and creative activities, if you look at them in a broad, rigorous sense, you discover that in Portugal, which is an European country with some difficulties in terms of innovation, in terms of education, in terms of a sound structure for its economy, but a developed economy, one of the 25 to 30 economies where people live better in the world. So it's in Portugal, we have an idea that Portugal is way behind that it really is, but that's our position. In Portugal, this accounts for something like 3% of our GDP, which is more than our fashion industry and almost our automotive industry, which are two industries that in Portugal people tend to speak a lot. Auto Europa and os têxteis do Norte. So these kind of activities are in GDP, in value-added arts, are more important for the Portuguese economy than the textiles, and almost as important as all the automotive industry. So they are relevant, but they are relevant not in a quantitative way. They are relevant for something that is what would be my contribution to the battle. First of all, the 20th century was the century of full employment. It didn't long to last. It didn't long a lot. It was something that we are able to create in the north, in the developed countries, for a generation. Something like after the World War II and until the oil shocks. But it was the full employment society. The 21st century will be, in my opinion, something that has nothing to do with full employment, but perhaps something more interesting, work for everybody. A society where everybody can work, can be productive, can contribute with human and social diversity to global happiness or to well-being, global well-being. So we in the next 50, 60 years, we'll have a lot of people who will take care of its own future. Ideas with no power, and power from ideas. Not power to submit anybody, but power to be independent, power to be rational, power to make things happen. So first of all, this is something that is, in my opinion, clear. Secondly, in world terms, more and more people will live in cities. The majority live already in cities. It was one of the transitions to this new century. And we'll reach, by 2030, something like 2/3 of the humanity in cities, and perhaps by 2050, 3/4 of the world population will be in cities. We are going to create things that won't last for long, mega cities, mega metropolis with 30 million or 35 million of inhabitants, but that will be a reality. And the new reality is the facilities for general production in differentiated products will locate in emergent economies, big emergent economies, not in Europe, not in the United States, not in Japan. So if we want jobs, if we want growth, if we want to keep our capacity to choose our own destiny and to be able to choose to go to Culturgest or to go to Centro Cultural do Way or not to go to that restaurant or not to that restaurant, to eat at home, to talk with friends or not to talk with friends. If we want to be discretionary about some of crucial decisions that make our happiness and our quality of life, we must create an economy that is based on knowledge, culture and creativity. That's where we have our competitiveness factors, not in processing materials, processing resources. Our economy is not about resources, is not about production. Our economy is now about needs. And being a good entrepreneur, being a good worker, being a good politician, is to be able to link needs with knowledge. We must address human and social needs with knowledge. I just want 30 seconds to a final remark. A final remark is, if you try to look at arts, those that Jorge was talking, the hard nucleus of arts, the intemporal arts, the ones where the future and the past meet in the present, and we have nothing at all. We have a permanent meeting, a permanent playing of human creation. If you look at that, and then you look at something that is very different, which is cultural industries, which are present, which are our time, and you look at creative activities. I have a small battle of ideas about the, I wouldn't say stupid, but inaccurate and useless term of creative industries. You don't have creative industries. Every industry is my harm, my strong belief. Industries in Europe, industries in developed countries are all creative, or they don't exist. So if you look at creative activities, you have citizens, consumers, and educated and competent professionals as the stakeholders of this game. And this is why the report or the Green Book has something to do with reality. But in my opinion, not as one of the miraculous proposals of politicians that have only present, nor past, nor future. They just talk about surfing the present, surfing the news, surfing the things that can be organized and done every day. If you look at politics with a big P, what you need is a new strategy and a global reform where arts, creative activities, and industrial culture activities are crucial for our future. They will be crucial for our wages and for our income, even if that income will be bigger and bigger, coming not from wages but from our own professional activities, organized in new forms and organized in traditional forms that take risks.
Final sentence, final.
No, it's
Okay, thank you. Sorry to be rude, but time coming on. Can we say thank you very much? I'm sorry to my panel. I know that you've got so much to say, but we will try and come back on all of these things, and there are some fantastically interesting things there that we want to unpack in a minute. Angus.
Thanks. I think one way to try and answer the question of what are the arts good for is very simply to say for their own sake. But I don't actually like that slogan very much. I'm always much happier to try and define the arts in terms of truth and beauty. I know that's very unpopular to say that these days. It's kind of too much Kant, too much Hegel, very, very old-fashioned. But nonetheless, I think that's where we should try and take a stand. Art for art's sake, though, I think is useful as a shorthand. It's an appeal. It reminds us never to think of art as being directly for the sake of something else, a means to an end, a matter of outcomes and results. In fact, I think we should remember that the arts are, in a very strict philosophical but real sense, the arts, as Jorge has said, useless. They're not functional. They're products which are long-lasting. They aspire to immortality, and they're made for the future. They're not to be consumed. They're not use values. They're removed and kept separate, isolated from the world of necessity. And their capacity for durability, in that sense, is the very opposite of functionality. Oscar Wilde put this well. A work of art is useless as a flower is useless. A flower blossoms for its own joy. We gain a moment of joy by looking at it. But the arts today are talked about as being ever so very useful. The arts are everywhere and called on to do an awful lot, to work hard. They're asked to save the economy, protect the environment, act as moral saviours of societies addicted to consumption, to make us happy, promote health and regenerate communities, and make young people into better citizens. That's a lot. The experience of the arts in the UK, where I'm from, I think is a warning for Portugal. The way they have been harnessed to being useful. I think terrible lessons have been learned in the UK at great cost, but at least there are things that you can still avoid. Over the past 13 years in the UK under New Labour, the arts establishment has formed an alliance with politicians, agreeing that the arts should be promoted for social and political outcomes, as well as the purely economic ones of the Thatcher government that preceded. But Nick Sirota, who's the director of the Tate Gallery, wrote yesterday in the Guardian newspaper in the UK about how the string of galleries that have been built over the country in the last 10 years are exciting spaces, offering a social and cultural mix that engages young people in the culture of their time. He stressed the importance of art as a way of capturing the attention of young people. He did not say if these new galleries are any good or not, nor what's in them. That aside, is there an argument that today is a positive moment for the arts? Artists and the creative industries are very much flattered and courted by politicians and policymakers. George Osborne, the British Chancellor of the Exchequer, said, "We are deeply committed to the arts sector. The arts play a vital role in our communities, helping to bind people together and create real social value." He didn't say if they're any good or not. Art, we are told, is as much about taking part, participation, as it is about what is derisively called mere passive appreciation or contemplation. The very difference today between artists and audience is under attack. Art institutions are desperate to reach out to new audiences. They reject what they call the old-fashioned elitism of the high arts. They want to democratize the arts, break down social barriers, and reduce inequality. Art is to be measured in a language not of taste and connoisseurship, of excellence, but of public value. And whether or not you think this trend is positive, I don't. There is a problem now after the recession. Today, very many people are worried that the funding will dry up for the arts. Sirota fears cuts in the UK must inevitably result in a much smaller number of galleries and theatres, fewer chances for young people to broaden their experience of life. And one of the difficulties the arts establishment faces today in defending itself from cuts is that they have been justifying themselves in instrumental terms for so long that they've lost the ability, or maybe the will, to justify themselves in their own terms. I think rather than argue that art in galleries is good and that it's beautiful and that it would simply be a matter of public duty to look after it and display it, they find it easier to argue that we need galleries to promote economic and social regeneration, that we need orchestras to create jobs. Lifting ourselves out of ourselves with beautiful music is not mentioned, maybe as an afterthought, maybe as a memory of how things used to be. What is the best and the easiest way of stimulating the economy in cities that have lost their industry? Should you build a gallery or should you build a factory? Do we build the gallery because we love the arts or because we can't afford the factory? If the factory is not profitable, do we then react by trying to pretend that the arts are? There is a very real danger, and this has happened in the UK, that we refuse to answer this difficult question. Instead, we redefine what the arts mean, and we redefine what the economy means. We talk about the creative industries and the cultural sector, and we lump together the traditional arts, which often need public money to survive, with things like video games and television shows. And then we argue that they make an important contribution to the economy. And maybe they do. Maybe other things, though, make more of a contribution. But is this the arts anymore? In the UK, defence spending is a very important contribution to the economy. We could argue that being in the army is a great way of getting the attention of young people, teaching them to be good citizens, and making them value things that are not materialistic, like patriotism and comradeship. But if we just want to broaden the experience of young people, should we fund the military or the arts? And if we fund the arts, should we buy pictures or invest instead in a children's interactive area or a restaurant to improve the all-round cultural experience of visitors? In Shetland, in Scotland, the Arts Development Agency recently considered where to invest and decided that taking out a commercial loan to buy land next to the Bonhaga Art Gallery to build a hydroelectric power generator next door was wholly, completely mission-aligned. This has nothing to do with art, and it's nothing to do with the investment that's needed for real economic recovery. So I think, to conclude, that we really need to resist this moment. We need to be very critical. Our criticism, after all, can form consensus through public argument. We can learn what we ought to like and what we ought not to. It's a moral question. And when we talk so much about the importance of culture and the cultural industries, we should stop and think, why is it that we never like to talk anymore of being cultured? We should stop chasing audiences and rather try and create audiences who are prepared to cultivate their taste and exercise their judgment. And I think if we can do this, we can learn to appreciate the real value of art, something that can give us a sense of being free in the world, of feeling right, of fittingness. In fact, it can help us to explain why we exist.
Okay, thank you, Angus. This is exactly 7 minutes. That's very good. That's because it's from the Institute of Ideas. And I made him practice 2 times. Right, Miguel.
Okay, thank you for... You invited me, so I should thank you or not.
No, he's your boss, that doesn't work. No.
I will read what I've sketched. Otherwise, I will get lost. If I start improvising, it will take much more than the 7 minutes. So, I will not refer to the arts in the plural, but to the specific field of contemporary art, which doesn't mean that some of the ideas and points that you expressed, or better said, sketched here, can't be extrapolated to other domains of artistic creation. I have to say that I don't consider contemporary art to be part of the so-called cultural or creative industries, and I think these terms are very dangerous because they put things together that have nothing to do with one another, and they are very dangerous. I'm not being moralistic. I'm having a pragmatic, I hope, view on these matters. It puts contemporary art in a very vulnerable and fragile position, because then it has to compete with the so-called cultural industries that produce money and produce jobs and are entertaining, which I don't think contemporary art is. So, I will start by making a very simple observation that has to do with demographics. The number of artists has grown exponentially in the last decades. Does this mean that contemporary art is more relevant or necessary today than it was, say, in 1960? In the last decades, the number of art centers, museums, and galleries, and therefore the number of exhibitions, has also grown tremendously. And not only in the so-called Western world, also in parts of the world that until recently lacked the strong context or a structured context for the production, distribution, and reception of contemporary art. The proliferation of biennials in almost every corner of the world is an evident symptom. The astonishing expansion of the art system, driven by the expansion of the art market in China, is its most obvious case study. Does this mean that contemporary art is more relevant or necessary today than it was, say, in 1960? The discussion we are having here today finds its, sorry for the French, raison d'être in the following problem. Although the art system has expanded enormously, contemporary art doesn't seem to engage more than a relatively reduced public. Let us not take the part for the whole. Mega institutions that attract a large public, being highly dependent on the phenomenon of tourism. Institutions that include in their program many of the so-called blockbuster exhibitions. The MoMA in New York, the Centre Georges Pompidou in Paris, or the Tate Modern in London, for example. These institutions have nothing to do with most contemporary art centers and museums, which rely on a small public with a much more specific interest, a much more focused interest in contemporary art. The Kunstverein in Düsseldorf, the Witt in Rotterdam, the Kunsthalle in Basel, to give you a few examples. Here, in these institutions, in most cases, an exhibition is experienced by no more than 3,000 people. When public policies for contemporary art are under discussion, especially in a time of widespread financial and economic crisis, then the lack of resonance of contemporary art as a significant experience for the majority of the population, puts contemporary art in a position of extreme vulnerability. We could speak in this respect of a crisis of legitimacy. A crisis of legitimacy that affects, in a very negative way, the definition of public policies for contemporary art. There is a withdrawal on the part of politicians. It's the easiest way. They're hopeless and impotent and incapable of defining an agenda that is not constrained by a narrow perspective on what's useful and therefore profitable in political terms. Let me put it bluntly. I don't think the social relevance or value of contemporary art has anything to do with certain functions or goals supposedly contributing to an improvement of life in society that are more and more often invoked to justify why it should be supported by public funding or private patronage, sponsorship for that matter. From this point of view, I would say that contemporary art is good for nothing. It doesn't perform those functions or goals that supposedly improve our life. I don't think that's the task of contemporary art and the task of artists. Throughout the 20th century, artists and art movements embraced the utopia that art could bring social changes, that it could change society. A beautiful utopia that was associated with the production of extraordinary works of art, but nevertheless, an utopia that was never fulfilled. It is historically proven that art doesn't change or improve social life. Throughout the 20th century, artists and art movements have experimented with diluting or even abolishing the frontiers between art and life. I'm using the terms under which these things are discussed in the field of contemporary art because I don't believe in this separation between art and life. Extraordinary works of art were produced in light of this desire, but art and life remain apart, and this is a good thing. The white cube, the architectonic expression of that separation between the spaces of art and the spaces of daily life, has been subjected to a radical critique. But the white cube remains the exhibition space that provides the best conditions to present and experience contemporary art. Not the only space, not adequate for all artworks, but I would say the one that provides the best conditions to present and experience the majority of artworks. And that's a good thing. What is then the social relevance of contemporary art as I see it? To put it very roughly, art makes possible an experience, an individual experience, that doesn't take place, at least with the same degree of intensity, in our daily life. And that is not provided or afforded or made possible by the so-called cultural industries. It disrupts our common ways of seeing the world and thinking about the world. It can play a very decisive role. It depends on our degree of engagement. It can play a very decisive role in the constitution of our own subjectivity. It enriches our subjective, individual, I stress again, experience in the world at large. And this is something invaluable, and that's why I think art should be supported by public funds, and why politicians should start thinking about contemporary art in a more open way. And this is something invaluable, even if it doesn't make us better persons.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, everybody. Right, some quick fire questions to you all, and then out to the audience. And just to say to the people in the room that I can't see you, but I know you can see us in the outlying room. If you want to speak, you can put your hand up and there'll be somebody in there who has a microphone who can come in and you can make your point. So if you've got something to say, do say it wherever you are. George, can I just ask you, first of all, why do you think it is that, as it were, your contemporaries in the arts world have so readily embraced these non-artistic arguments for the arts? Not just in the recent period, but over some time now.
Yes.
Why is that so popular? Why can't they argue
Why is
for
it
art?
so popular? What?
Yeah, well, you started off with art is useless.
Yes.
But I haven't heard anyone in the arts argue that for a long time. I mean, we've gathered some people who are arguing that, but why is everybody so keen on telling us how useful they are?
Yes, that's something I quote from Mario Diniz, who was a great writer, and that has to do with Miguel, what Miguel said. Matisse or Picasso didn't change the world, but the world would have been different if Matisse or Picasso didn't exist. That is, I think, the problem of contemporary art. The aim is not the use, but the world has changed.
But do you think, just in terms of this sort of attempt to make an explanation for yourself, particularly when it comes to funding, but not just funding, why is it that artists haven't got the confidence to just be art and to say art is art? Why all of these arguments about it improves well-being, it improves...
Because everybody asks us a justification of what we are doing, and nobody accepts us to be robbers.
But why can't you just stare them in the... But why not
Which
stare
is
them
the
in
only thing I aim to be, and Schiller wrote about it.
Yeah. But, I mean, I suppose that's my question. I mean,
But there's
like,
one
yeah,
sentence,
go on.
One sentence I like very much from another very good Portuguese artist. He told me last Saturday, art inaugurates, which is the best definition of art that I have been hearing for the last decade. Art inaugura, that's foi Fernando Lemos, como disse. That's to say, you don't know what's going to happen before it starts something. Yes. What's the use of that thing that is started? You don't know. Art inaugurates. And that's the possibility of inaugurating is the possibility of being not only new, but opening to something. And that's what you want. But mainly, in 97% of my life, I didn't inaugurate a thing. I made very bad things. Maybe I inaugurated something, but it was useful not to inaugurate.
Yeah. So, my same question really to you, Miguel. Just why, you said you don't like the term creative industries. Why are these things
I don't
used
have anything against the creative industries.
You just don't want the art.
I just don't agree with the inclusion of contemporary art, even if it has become such a complex system. Within
in that category,
within that category, yeah, absolutely. I think we're talking about different things, and if we talk about cinema, then we're putting in competition films that have no economic viability, but that can be, very rarely, but it happens, masterpieces, and that possibility of masterpieces to be produced is incredibly important, with other films that are just entertaining. And I have nothing against a film that entertains. I have a problem when we're having a discussion that leads, or when policies are being defined in such a way that these two things are competing for scarce resources.
Okay, I mean, that's what I just was clarifying. So, kind of taking it to Augusto and Angus a little bit, just in terms of your different kind of conceptions of economic development, because I thought you made a very good case, which I just want Angus to answer before you come back on it. I thought that Professor Mateus made a good case for saying, well, you know, he's got a different conception of economic development. This is more for well-being. It's not quite the same thing. This is why being creative is a different kind of contribution now, not in as narrow kind of money terms, but just can actually take the way forward. You maybe made it sound as though the economy was all factories and things like that. And anyway, could you kind of reflect on that, Angus?
Well, I mean, it's not all factories, obviously. I mean, the economy is not just a matter of smokestacks. You know, you could make a lot of money out of very creative things like an iPad or an iPhone, for example. So it doesn't, don't need to think in terms of the economy of old-fashioned, mills and so on. But nonetheless, I think it remains something very much in the material world. It's something to do with profit and loss and balance sheets at the end of the day, and making a profit. And I think that there's a danger of being faced with very profound economic difficulties to, as I was indicating, try and dodge that question, if you like. It may be that the answer to the economic problems we face in the developed world is that there's a need for real austerity, real cuts, quite painful restructuring of the economy onto a new basis. That's hard work. I think there's a danger that it's quite easy to say, let's all become creative. Let's get paid for having nice ideas, and what I do at home on my computer with Photoshop. Oh, hey, it's art, isn't it? I'm an artist now, and I'm saving the economy. I think both sides of the equation suffer there, not to the advantage of either. I don't think it's good for art, as Miguel is saying, to be associated in that way. But I think it distracts...
Bad company.
Bad bedfellows. I think it distracts us from dealing with the economic problems. I think European cities of culture, to be controversial, is a perfect example of that. You can't deal with the devastating effects of deindustrialization by putting out some hanging baskets of flowers and kind of tarting up Glasgow as a city of culture. We know it's not true. It's patronising, and it turns people off the arts.
Those of you who don't know Glasgow, that was very insulting to anyone from Glasgow.
I'll say the same about Liverpool.
Yeah, or Liverpool. I mean, they might not be as familiar here. Anyway, Professor Mateus, just do you sort of see the dangers for the arts of arguing for themselves in these instrumental terms of the economy, and that maybe you're one of the bad guys encouraging us to do it that way,
Yes.
to be blunt?
I'm trying to express my opinions in global terms.
Yeah.
Now that neither as an artist or a non-artist. So I really don't see a battle in things that are obvious. Arts are arts. They have to do with our life and with our citizenship. They have nothing to do with Excel, money, or anything else. But they will be better in a civilization where we act with as being, and not in a civilization where we act as having. If we have, we are in some kind of society and some kind of citizenship. If we are in another dimension. So, of course, we must have to be, but it's, I think, everybody understands what I'm saying. If I am something interesting by reading French books, like Jorge was trying to encourage us, I must have them, and they must be written, they must be used. If they are well dressed up in our room, we live in a society where people buy just the surface of the books, not the books. Or they buy the books and don't read them, or just read the 3 or 4
Or they don't
pages.
buy the books.
Many of our politicians bought a lot of books and they read the contents, the inauguration of the
Inauguration.
book. They inaugurated the book. Okay. So they know about everything. They are perhaps the best examples of the main difficulty in our society is to be able to transform information in knowledge.
Yes.
We have lots of information. Information is almost free. We can access information about everything. To transform that information in knowledge, it's difficult. So my point is, arts are good for living in a society with shorter life cycles of products, shorter life cycles of technology, shorter life cycles of knowledge. Because we must have much more lives in our life. And arts, artistic education, it's not about having Portuguese musicians to play Beethoven or Bach. It's to have everybody, some common Portuguese, to be able to be more flexible and more open and more able to have its own futures. Just a point about useful, what is standard deviation useful for? When you really use standard deviation is when you have something relevant to do, when you need mathematics for it. So, arts are useful in very different ways. Very different ways. So, we cannot address an immediate use for arts. Arts are useful for our travel in this planet. Arts are useful for humankind, all over the times. We are arriving from very long ago, and we'll go, although any problems we have, we'll go a lot of centuries further. So arts are for that. And creative industries are about, or culture industries, which is the precise, are about using the results of some artistic production to present things to consumers, like we present milk, croissants, automotives, because these are glasses or consumption aesthetics.
Okay, so Angus wanted to come in very quickly, and I'm going to go to the audience. Any quick points? If anyone from the panel wants to come in very quick in the midst of this, but Angus, quickly.
Well, it just occurred to me the choice between being poor and happy or rich and unhappy is the one that we try and live our lives not having to make, because we know that neither side necessarily works out. It can obviously be the case that being poor can be horrible, right? There's nothing good about it. Being rich can be brilliant, right? But somehow we like to not be in a position to have to make those choices. But I think against that framework, we have to remember that the arts don't come for free, in a way. You need a certain degree of luxury in society, civilization. The beauties of Venice weren't built because the economy was a failure, but because it was a huge success. Right? So you do need material wealth being created in society to allow you, A, to create the arts, but B, the time and the distance and the luxury to step back and appreciate them. So both things need to go together, I think, in the good life, in a kind of a marriage of quantity and quality. Otherwise, you're faced with either decadence on the one hand, consumptionist aesthetics, or barbarism, factories.
Okay. Who wants to speak?
Can I use 10 seconds?
10 seconds is 10 seconds, though. Can I see who wants to speak? Hands up. You can carry on for 10 seconds.
Okay.
But hands up, everyone. Who's going to speak? Come on.
Angus said about opening a factory or opening a gallery. Our problem is we must open factories that are galleries and galleries that are factories. It's not about separating material and immaterial, is to join material and immaterial.
But that's where we disagree.
That's where you disagree. Let me tell you, do not agree. There is a battle there, even if everyone tries to avoid it. It's a definite distinction in the positions. Right, who wants to speak? Can I see some hands? Thank you. So I've got that lady there and then that gentleman there, yeah? That lady in the middle. If you just pass it along. Thanks.
Good afternoon. This is a wonderful initiative to have the opportunity to discuss these issues, apparently so useless, so cost-free, or not. What I would like to say is regarding the use or uselessness of art, and that is, I can't imagine ourselves going through our lives, going through our careers, going through our jobs, without having the opportunity to experience moments of happiness, moments of opportunities to think, opportunities to enjoy beauty, to enjoy or something that is not beautiful but shakes our ideas, shakes our emotions somehow. And the society has been so massified recently. Everything is massively produced for everybody to have their hands on. Education is there to open lots of doors to everybody, to create publics more or less aware of what they're in front of, but that's our world. That's what That's what economy maybe aims at, creating consumers for everything. that this art provides us the moment to be unique. And that's this monologue that we desperately need, I think. That's my view. That's the purpose, the use of art.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Can you just pass the microphone down a couple of rows? That's it, to that gentleman there.
Thank you. Well, it's interesting that it's come to this argument about whether art is useless or useful, and also we've got this kind of fight between commerce and art, which are things that I think are highly important. But for me, actually, what really summed up what the argument is about is when Miguel said that what a work of art might do. I'm probably misquoting you, but you said what a work of art can do is disrupt our lives. And now I think that's a very important word, disrupt. In other words, there's something about art that is in itself essentially, I'm going to use the word subversive. That is why it's dangerous, because it is subverting the way that we are being asked by commerce, by politicians, by the society to look at the world. And to me, that actually is why there can never be a happy marriage between commerce and art. And why some of the speakers have mentioned the fact that they're worried about the way art has been taken over by society and kind of made respectable and productive and useful. And no, I don't think it can be. I think that art is, by its very essence, not able to do that because it is subverting the normal view of the world, if you like.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else who wants to speak? I just wanted to say in response to that, by the way, actually there's a person behind, so yes, just in response to that, it's just quite interesting because which I just want to throw out to all the audience, really. I was asked recently to speak on a panel which was entitled, which is a big panel in London, which is How Arts Can Fight Climate Change. And everybody from all arts, theatre and everything stood up and said, you know, theatre can fight climate change this way, contemporary art can fight climate change. It's kind of entirely as though this was a perfectly reasonable thing to ask the arts to do. But a few months before that, I'd been at a sort of a different event, which was how the arts can contribute to social cohesion and fighting racism. And again, the same sort of people stood up and said exactly the same kind of things. So it's not even just a kind of economic thing. And that's really why I was throwing the question out. Why are the arts queuing up to offer to do all of these things? And it's possible, by the way, that that actually they're not going to deliver the very nice political answers everybody wants, because once you throw the arts out there, somebody might go and see a piece of art and turn into a racist. I mean, why do you think that they're all going to become anti-racist climate warriors? You might throw propaganda at them, but that's not art anyway. The person behind.
Yes. Well, I suppose everybody likes to be useful. And I think one of the... I think that there are two things in this debate. One is the challenge that you're presenting to artists about not being pragmatic, because I think one of the things that's happened, certainly in the UK, is a bowing down to a pragmatism where artists can see that the money is there if they play the game. And the game is to be socially useful. And that is a big problem for anybody who doesn't think that their art has something socially useful about it. They just want to do art. And I think that what Miguel was saying is really very much to the point on that we do need to make that argument for people who just want to do art. But I think that argument's become quite difficult to make because there's a sort of an air of elitism. And if you think about politics over the last 50, 70 years, the trend has been very much against elitism. And to put yourself in a position as an artist where you cut yourself off from society and contemplate something to try and give it expression, and you may fail or you may not, you may fail in that, and if you fail in that, you are poor, unless you can persuade somebody to give you money that, whether you fail or not, you are still useful. And I think that fear of elitism is a really big problem at the moment, because it frightens people away from making a strong argument when in fact everybody has to live if they want to do, they have to earn money if they're going to live, so they resort to pragmatism.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else? Yes, there's a lady up there. If you pass it along and back, I think is easiest in this instance.
Hi, I'll try to be short. I felt the need to talk because, although I'm not personally responsible, I do head the cabinet that ordered the Mateus study that has been obviously mentioned here. The whole sector of cultural and creative industries has maybe become, and essentially it's jargon. It does mean many things, different things to different people, so let's keep that in mind. It's not a closed concept, it's broad. Some people may like that fact, some people may dislike it precisely of that fact. It's maybe become too fashionable for their own good, and you're right to raise the problems that we've seen in the UK. But I would also ask, was there nothing accomplished by that investment in the UK? Are there no lessons to be learned? Is there nothing that we can actually use from that experience? And somehow I do get the impression, and the idea is to be provocative, right? So I'll do my best. And my boss is in the room, so give me a break. The point is, it seems that this is a sector that is very hard to please. I mean, you say Brussels has decided that the cultural sector is important. How dare they? You know, I mean, you're British. It's in your DNA to hate Brussels. But we in Portugal, we actually have gained a lot from different directions that the EU has taken and funds, etc., that they've given us. So I'm being very frank with you here. From my perspective, which is, of course, a governmental one, if you like, or a ministerial one, it is important to justify. I don't think it's up to you or it's up to cultural agents to have to come up with justifications. I think that's wrong, and I find it quite sad when I hear some of them trying to come up desperately with this kind of political jargon. But we do. When we are facing a situation of cuts in hospitals, cuts in all sorts of sectors, put yourself in our place. Try to go and negotiate with the Ministry of Economy and the Ministry of Finance to give us money to pay for some of the things that you would consider as art, others maybe not. So I do feel that the Mateus study, that can be criticized in many different aspects, and no study is perfect, but it was a very important study to open a few eyes and a few doors. And in that sense, I do think it was somewhat of a turning point in Portugal.
That's a very useful contribution. A number of things. I mean, actually, that is exactly the dilemma. And this is exactly the dilemma that people have, which is we're going to close a hospital down. We're going to close a gallery down. The question, I suppose, that broadly I want to put is, does it work if the gallery says, well, we contribute to healthy living and well-being as well, in a way to kind of try and compete on that territory? That's kind of, but you can see the dilemma. Just because I think it's important, before the British ambassador has a heart attack, I am about as representative as Britain. I mean, I'm a dissident in Britain, right? Britain can be held responsible for a lot of things. My views are definitely not one of them. So there's lots of rows about this in Britain. So I merely make the point that what I say about Brussels and the EU is not exactly the same as what the British state says, just as an aside, in case anyone should confuse that. They can apologise for themselves. I'm just making that point. Right. Anyone else? And then I'll get the panel to kind of come back. This lady here, then I'll take a few comments in the panel, then I'm back out again. And just because you're in that room and you think I can't see you, I can a bit. So I'm sure there's lots of very strong opinions through there if you'd like to speak. Yes?
Well, you asked the question, just what are the arts good for? And I believe that depends who you are. If you're an artist, it's what you want to do, it's what you love to do. If you're an appreciator, it's in the eye of the beholder. If you're the government, is it draining money or is it making money? I am in no way an artist, so I can't speak for artists. I can say that I had a lovely 4-day weekend. We had a holiday here, reading a wonderful book, watching a wonderful film, and listening to wonderful music. And I wouldn't have spent the weekend without art for anything. On the other hand, I have to say that I think the British experience is very much a positive one. Chris Smith and his mapping study brought to light to the skeptics, both the financial sector and the government, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the importance of the creative industries. let's not undermine that. And I can totally understand why, if you're an artist, you would feel why all this pressure to produce and to create. But hey, the whole world feels that pressure at the moment, on one hand. And on the other hand, you know, I would love to watch a play about climate change. I would love to learn about racism through theatre. And I think the UK experience is extremely positive, and we in Portugal have an awful lot to learn from it. And so let's be positive about it without not asking questions. Let's keep asking questions. I totally agree. But let's look on the positive side as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Yes. And then the panel.
This is an appeal for a doctor for my heart collapsing. I think
He's the British ambassador.
Maybe you need to separate a bit a discussion about what are art's good for and whether public money should go into it. I think you're blending the two together. In fact, you need to make a distinction a bit between the two. I find I get quite annoyed actually in these debates because we tend to be feel, well, a few of us were artists and the rest of you are consumers, and so it gets a separation that way. It's amazing how little you talk about the supply side of art, the joy of creation. The value of creation in itself in terms of human existence. I think it's so fundamental to the way human beings are born and live that it is worth pondering when you ask yourself what the art's good for. Part of it is the creation of art by more than just a small group of people who are called artists.
Okay, thank you. I'm now going to appeal that the Brits don't dominate this debate. So it's also the case that the people of Portugal have a row as well. But anyway, so I'm going to turn to you first, Miguel. Any comments on anything that anyone said? Any just quick response you want to give on anything so far?
Can
I come back to you in a minute? Or?
No. Well, one thing I want to say is that if I was listening to myself, if I was on that side, on the side of the audience, and someone else was saying the things I said, there would be a lot of misunderstandings. I mean, a lot of things have to be nuanced. And 5 or 7 minutes are not time enough to make all the nuances and make the argument more complex, because these issues are incredibly complex. Actually, sometimes I'm finding myself advocating less funding for contemporary art. I mean, let me explain. I think, for example, what is labeled as public art, when you do an exhibition, an artist makes an exhibition in an exhibition space, that's public art. It's public. It's not because it's on the street, in a plaza, that it's public art. But I'm now talking about art that gets outside the spaces, the confined spaces, the specialized spaces for contemporary art. And I'm not advocating art to be presented only in these spaces or experienced only in these places. But I have a problem with this spreading disease of art in the public space. And I think the task of art is not to decorate public space. I think artists have nothing to do in the so-called public space. Most art produced as such is pure decoration. It's dreadful. It doesn't make the experience of the urban space better. On the contrary, in most cases, it makes it worse. For example, there are a few exceptions. When Felix González Torres makes a billboard in New York City and he puts the picture of a pillow, that's an extraordinary, poetic, and provocative image. Very sexually charged, actually. But to give you another example, when Richard Serra makes an extraordinary piece called Title Arc in Washington, and the piece was for sure very expensive. It was decided by politicians. The money was made available by politicians. And then, years later, politicians decided to remove this sculpture. And I think it's an extraordinary piece of art. It's It's a kind of a curved wall that intersects a roundabout. And what it made to people that use that space, it forced them to go around that huge sculpture. So in this case, it disrupted in a very negative way, in my, as I see it, the routines, the daily life routines of many people. And why should we impose art that we consider to be something important to people that have no interest whatsoever in art? Why should we colonize the so-called public space because we decide that it is important for everyone? And everyone is has a legitimate right to do whatever they want with their lives, to see whatever they want. A terrible soap opera that I consider to be terrible in TV, it's not a problem. So art should be, there should be an enormous effort to share it with as many people and people as diverse as possible. But we have to be cautious, not to impose. It's what Pierre Bourdieu calls symbolic violence.
Okay, no, thank you. That was really well observed, really brilliant. But I haven't got time for everyone to do one of those, that's all. No, it was really good. But Jorge, Professor Mateus, Angus, quick thoughts from you, then quick things from the audience, because we do have to end. But Jorge first.
I think we haven't spoken about one thing that is very important, is why are the budgets of art getting higher and higher? Can't we do art with less money? And that is a very important thing for theatre, for film, for art. Isn't the price, of course, the costs of things getting crazily high? Aren't other possibilities of producing art the solution for the question, are you going to close a hospital or a gallery if you produce cheaper things or in another way of producing? And that's the problem of capitalism.
Okay, thank you. Nice, short and important.
Trying to be short. First of all, in the 60s, more or less 50% of family income was destined to food. Now, something like 10%. In Europe, in Portugal, in the developed world, we have millions and millions of people who can make decisions about how to spend their money. Of course, we have millions of people who cannot make that decision. We have poor people. But basically, the majority of the population can have decisions about to consume this or that. And many of their decisions have to do what you said. Something as we act not as consumers, we act as human beings with citizens who access public goods and services and who make decisions about our quality of life and our happiness. So first of all, that's something we need to address. I agree with you, subversive, of course. We don't have well-behaved critics or non-well-behaved. We have critics. And criticism is a scarce resource in our societies. And this is one initiative that is very well developed because it's something to show that criticism is very important. But my point is, if I am anything, I don't like to present myself as I am. If I am anything, I am a scientist. And between arts and science, the difference are very, very few. I work with ideas, I work with numbers, I work with behaviors, I work with equations, I work with a lot of things. And I try to produce useful ideas. But my useful ideas, I don't know when they will be used.
Yes, of course.
So the point is, when you are producing a work of art, contemporary, then 100 years later won't be contemporary. When you are producing a work of art or something from the sciences, you are trying to be useful to yourself and to the society where you live, even if you don't like the society where you live. And my point is Michelangelo or Galileo, who is the subversive? Where is the subversion? The subversion is when you bring things that will help the world to be better in 1 year, 1 day, 1 hour, 1 century, 10 centuries, 1,000 years. So the point is that. So I don't agree with separating arts from society, arts from economy, arts from well-being. Arts are arts. When you use arts, cultural industries, and creative activities, you are addressing problems that you presented. You cannot afford not to use. That is to say, you cannot afford in Europe, you cannot afford in UK, you cannot afford in Portugal, not to use the ability to say those non-useful things are very useful to create jobs and growth. That's one point. The second point...
No, we've got to stop because we're literally about to end.
Okay.
So, Angus, very quickly.
Next
quick.
session.
Yes, well, it's just because we've got to end. So.
Well, very quickly, I mean, I think, yes, the arts can be subversive, but they can also be affirmative. I mean, you can't say it's one or the other. They can make you feel comfortable. But that said, I heard a number of contributions from the floor that were kind of in what I might call the comfort food theory of art. Does that make sense in Portuguese? It's either, you know, I want my art and I need my art to get my weekly fix of transcendence. Otherwise, without it, life is meaningless. I'm afraid it's not guaranteed. Right? You do actually have to know something about it. You have to bring your experience and your taste and your criticism, and you might not even get it then. Or you have a comfort food theory of art, which is it'll help reinforce my prejudices in a way that racism is bad or environmentalism is the cause to be supported. And you think you're being radical when you say that. These are completely mainstream point of view. That's not these days that's very, very mainstream. So that's not an example of art being subversive in that case. It's more comforting. I think our key problem here is that there's been a collapse. This is what we learned from the experience of the UK and elsewhere. There's been a collapse in our confidence to say that there's a difference between high art, mass culture, entertainment, and what children do when they paint pictures. You know, my little daughter gets creative joy from you know, painting on my kitchen table. It's not art. I may try and kid myself it is, but I couldn't kid you. You know, it's not art. We need to be actually had to have the language of taste and discernment to talk about art that's meaningful, that can be universalizable. That's when it starts to have value in our lives, if you like. Otherwise.
Okay. Any quick points from the floor? Rob wants to say something. Anyone else? Well, no. Anyone who hasn't spoken?
I was very impressed by our artist and our art curator being a bit frightened of the boa constrictor embrace of the state embrace of the creative industries, and that's good to see, because obviously there's a danger if we think this idea that art should be, at least good art should be subversive and disruptive, or at least have the potential to disrupt. Then artists and art curators should be worried about this. But what's I think is quite striking in the cultural industry debate is that the people who are sponsoring the arts in this form, or at least trying to include the arts into the cultural industries, are not worried about art at all. They're not worried about it being disruptive, and they're not worried about it. They're not worried about this subversive potential. It does make you worry that maybe the arts aren't that disruptive or subversive anymore.
Okay, thank you. And then along here, yeah.
Well, I've worked both with artists and academics who think about art. And I've seen, and I worry about, I see that in Portugal too, the art tries to justify itself through politics and trends, and there is an instrumentalization of art in that sense. I can sense it from both sides. For instance, from the academic part, it's even more crude. You know, try to justify why an artist who's always been a reactionary is actually not a reactionary at all, and you turn historical context upside down to justify certain things. So if there are big trends like racism and migration issues, there's a huge growth in post-colonial studies, for instance, and gender studies. So these things. They are very clear for those who work in academia. But having said that, I don't think I agree with the premise of some of the panelists here from the beginning. I don't think art for art's sake is a good word, or that the arts don't have a purpose. arts have a purpose, but you cannot determine it from the start. So governments cannot do it, perhaps authors cannot do it. And it's problematic what you do with authors like Eliot or Pound or even Fernando Pessoa, who've been engaged in kind of very reactionary activities or thoughts, etc., and you don't know what to do with them. But I think that's a different thing than actually seeing art as something that is only beautiful or universal, etc. I don't believe in that. Art is political and is social, and it's related with that. And I don't see it as universal, as other things are not. It's contextual and it's historical. But it cannot be predicted. So it should not be the aim of the author or the aim of governments to try to find the rules for art. There'll be a mystery.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else? That's raised a lot of really interesting questions, and as with all of these discussions, you can feel as though it's just starting, now it's ending. But part of the point of this is to put in some provocations that we can all have a row over cocktails about, and that you probably leave this place with more questions than when you came in, which at least means that we've had an interesting discussion. That lady there, and if there's any quick final points, then I'll just give our panellists their final thought of the day that we can take away with us to discuss more informally.
Very quickly, I don't agree with some of the views that have been proposed, because I think the arts are not just useful, but they are necessary. And I think they are knowledge, they are a source of knowledge. And it's our obligation as artists, as citizens, to give access to that knowledge, because that knowledge can really make change. And I think the arts are about that. They are visions about the world, about life, which can change people's lives, change society. And so I think just the opposite from some of the views portrayed.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, this gentleman in the front here, in front of you.
Yes, I'd like to address a question to the others and to the panel. Is in spite of talking about including art in culture industries or creative industries, we can talk about culture contents in order to...
Cultured, sorry, I didn't hear that
Culture
word.
contents, in spite of trying to put art in everything. First, because when you talk about art, you talk about a beneficiary, a person that benefits from something. And when you talk about culture industries, you're talking about the consumers. So we're talking about audience. In spite, when you talk about creative industries, we're talking about a producer. Each one of us can become a producer. And you can be a producer for free, and you can be paid for what we produce. So the new technologies can improve this relation between art and non-art or cultural content. And that's why I don't want to fight against the idea that arts cannot be included in the other culture identity, but can be in a new glossary, a new word, a new concept, and that will be cultural contents. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Any final? Yes, that gentleman there.
Hello. I'll try to be really fast. I will just transmit the idea that has been forming in my head. We have been hearing a lot about sponsoring the arts and what they are for and justification. And I was thinking about when all the sponsoring is ended imagine a post-apocalyptic world. There's no governments. Art will still be created, and people will continue to look for it and find arts wherever. So this is just the idea that got me and made me think what really art is for. Well, we need it, and we will continue doing it and consuming it.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very nice. Right at the back there. I think this might be the final one, unless anyone can sneak. But
Hello.
then that's it.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Jorge if you could elaborate a bit as from his creative perspective, because I believe you're the only one sitting in the panel that has some experience of creating something that we can call art, so you could be equated to an artist, but I believe all you've said in the beginning is from a perspective of a producer. So since you are the only one that we can relate to an artist in this panel, which is for me a bit awkward, I would like to know if you can elaborate a bit on this.
On what exactly?
What is art good for? Since you are a...
Yeah, George, don't do it straight away. And don't do it at all in a way. Just hold on. Just any final things? I'm not trying to... But any final things? They're going to get 30 seconds, right? So he's not going to be able to elaborate on much. That's my point. And I knew this was going to happen, which is the hands go up, which is perfect. That lady there, and then somebody's coming in. Yes, bring them in. We've got to go for drinks. That gentleman with the yellow... Because I want people to join in, this is what we want, so that's good. Whoever's coming in from in here, just bring them in now, and we can get them to speak. Yes,
well,
sir.
I just think that it's a delicate balance, you know. I mean, art is passion. It's the deepest representation of the human soul. And if you confine it with directions, with financial questions, you will be choking it a bit. So you must be very careful with the balance. It's like a flower, like. Don't remember who said it, but that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe there's somebody from the other room who wants to speak. Yeah, oh, sorry, it was you. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, hello, good night. I sense some lack of movement in the discussion. I don't know if I can bring any. But, so for me, art is the movement that unfolds possibilities of existence. So in that sense, I just cannot understand, really I cannot understand some things that were said here about usefulness or not usefulness. You can really sense if it has any trepidation, if it's alive or if it's not alive. But the thing that I would like to add to the soup, like my carrot today for the soup, would be, could we just be a little bit clearer in this mixing creativity with art? Because I sense lots of times creativity as something being used and confused with art. And I think creativity is one of the skills that art exercises. And but it's really like a game where you already know the pieces. It's just about combining and recombining. And I think that art is not, this is a reduction of the sense of art for me. So art is about something that you cannot know what it is. So I cannot mix it with creativity in any sense. It's just that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to leave it there now and ask the panel in the order in which they spoke to, I'm afraid, give us your final 30-second sentence. The final thought you want the audience to take away, but not your final words, because let's carry on this conversation. It's only the start of it, and we can't possibly deal with everything. So in the order that you spoke, Jorge, please.
So I think in answering you, arts are good for everything. So they are useless because they are good for everything. It depends. They can commemorate, celebrate, not celebrate, entertain, not entertain. They are good for everything. It depends on the work itself.
Now, that's what I call perfect timing. Thank you, Jorge. Professor Mateus.
Well, one of the things that should be clear, art and culture are not included in cultural industries or creative activities. That was not well discussed here. It's clear, art and culture are one of the central elements that define human beings. They always exist, and they always will be crucial for what we are. So the discussion, it's not about the soup of creative industries where we put everything. It's about arts, culture, and the rest of the things we do. And that integration, which is one of the more transparent facts of our life, the deep integration between arts, culture, economy, society, cities, etc., etc., etc. So, this discussion is not about saying that art is exceptional or saying that art is not exceptional. This discussion is about how we can make arts and culture more useful for trivial things. It's about how we can stimulate more subversive artistic creations, how we can stimulate more subversive scientific creations. It's how about we can deal with our problems, with our challenge, human, social, Portuguese, UK, European, global, with intelligence and what is the center of the usefulness of arts, which is how are we able to inaugurate a new order, a new society, not a radical departing from what you are, but we must make a lot of changes, and that is for me the main question. So it's not about bringing arts and culture into a domain where we can guarantee that it's not subversive. It's not about doing things like fighting for public money by the wrong purpose. It's about societies that can afford more and more young, elder, middle-aged people doing arts, doing culture, and not by a day-to-day approach depending on public money or big private money. It's not about that. It's about artists.
Final thing.
It's about artists and about citizens that make arts less dependent from public money or big private money, that are able to make arts more crucial to our lives and more independent and autonomous as the adventure of being subversive or being creative or being whatever you want in terms of making a meaning for staying in this planet where we live.
Thank you. Angus?
I think millions of people throughout history have lived and continue to live without art. I wouldn't say that they're less human because of that. I mean, they have fulfilled lives without the necessity of art. But at the same time, millions of people are being lifted out of poverty as we speak by economic development, as Augusto said, mainly in the East, unfortunately. But it does show the possibility. I think, to come back where we started with Jorge, art, it's objects for the future. And as objects, the way you distinguish between them and make decisions about which one is good and which one is less good, it's in a world of appearances that objects live, and beauty is the word we use to make that distinction. And our taste makes us more or less capable of making judgments of beauty. So I think, actually, strangely, the subversive thing that we could do today is actually trying to hold on to the very best that we have from the past and understand just why it is good, and that maybe the challenge for people who think of themselves as being radical and subversive these days is actually a conservative, with a small c, project to hang on to and explain to other people why the great examples of the arts from the past do speak to us all and why they're worth trying to hang on to.
Thank you very much. And Miguel?
Since it's impossible to conclude, I will address a bit what the question Luisa proposed, and it reminded me. It reminded me of this song, "Video Killed the Radio Star." It's a bad analogy, but what I want to say is that culture, for me, has to do with consensus, with shared values and beliefs and tastes. So it's something that is already codified, something we all share and live happily with. Whereas art, for me, has a lot to do, and I agree with the woman that made one of the last interventions. Art has to do, I don't want to simplify, but has to do with what we don't know, what we haven't experienced. I'm not talking about the tons of bad art, lousy art, mediocre art. The art that I praise, that it interpellates me, that challenges me, that has some resonates in me. And It has to do with what I haven't experienced, what I don't know. It opens up, as paraphrasing the same intervention, it opens up tremendous possibilities of perception, of thinking, and in that respect, it affects the way we live in the world we live, the way we relate to others, the way we understand things or we think about. Culture has to do with habits, rules, norms, values that are shared. Art has nothing to do with that, as I see it. And this position runs the risk of being taken as idealistic. And of course it is, because I'm thinking about some things we call art, and I'm kind of discarding the majority of things we call art. But that's my personal relationship with art. And that's, for me, a very crucial distinction. And nowadays, art runs the risk of being devoured by culture, eaten up.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, George, very quick.
Very small.
My host's going to be cross.
I don't like the idea of using subversive with art, because I think it's a very romantic idea. I spent this morning hearing Water Music by Handel, and I cannot say it's a subversive work of art. Or reading the Lusiads. It depends on time.
Okay, thank you. Right. I just wanted to point out that actually when Miguel was speaking, he talked about lousy art, and earlier on he talked about public art that was kind of almost destroying the public space and getting in the way. I'm about to compliment you, so don't don't panic. No, what I was going to say was, I actually thought that this was these were quite brave things to say, and what I suggest is that actually quite a lot of people have said things that you don't actually often hear, even though sometimes it's difficult to get underneath topics like this. I'm afraid that there is something of an orthodoxy in debates about art these days, in general. I'm not now talking about in the UK. I mean in general. You only have to read discussions about art to discover that the art of criticism is in decline, for example. It is actually quite difficult to get people to make distinctions of judgment, to talk about lousy or to talk about excellent in any meaningful sense. A kind of cultural relativism has kind of, ensured that if you dare make distinctions, you're accused of all sorts of terrible things, being anti-democratic. How dare you say that that piece of art is better than that? And there's a whole issue around multiculturalism and having to show respect for everybody else's culture, regardless of whether things are artistically of merit and so on. I mean, it's become very confused. So we live in a climate, at least more broadly, where it's difficult to say brave things, and quite a lot of brave things have been said. There's also been, today, Jorge said, maybe we could actually create art more cheaply. It's not that, it's not that much. And then you can see, there's a kind of panic. Everyone's going, oh my God, he's encouraging funding cuts. It's giving the excuse to the politicians. But we have to say these things. If they're true, they have to be said. And so, really, that's what I wanted to conclude on. That I would suggest that there is a confidence crisis in the arts, even if people have not wanted to always admit that tonight. There is a reason why the arts are now discussed generally instrumentally, and no disrespect to those of you in Portugal, but you're not immune from this, right? It is happening here, even if everyone says, oh no, I don't quite know what you mean, or whatever. And maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing, but it's happening. I say to you, there is a confidence crisis in the arts. The arts haven't got the confidence to fight under their own banner. And ironically, the economists are too often prepared to hide under the skirts of the arts instead of sorting out the economic problems that we all have to face as well. I don't blame the economists for the economic crisis. But there is an economic crisis that won't be solved by the odd bit of creative industry here, there, or anything. It's not going to happen. So there's all sorts of challenges that we have. I hope you've at least got a little tiny taste of what the Battle of Ideas is trying to do. I know that we're in an economic crisis, so it might be a bit rich for me to say, get a cheap flight and come over to London to the festival, but get a cheap flight and come over to London to the festival and come and join in. Let's take some of the arguments we've had here, let's have them universally in London, not because London's the centre of the universe, The reason why we set up the Battle of Ideas International satellites, for you to know, is because we sometimes felt that our British audiences were, A, only hearing British voices, and we know that that can be a weakness of the British, and that we'd actually run out of British intellectuals to have on public panels, because we've been doing this for a long time, so we wanted to get some European and international speakers in, and what we really want is to feel that it's an international festival. So you would all be welcome to come and stir it up in London at the end of October. If you're not able to do that, then do also get involved with the Lisbon Salon, which Rob is bravely trying to start. My colleague, very nice bit of internationalism, is one of the interns who works absolutely for free in our office and has worked his guts out. By complete coincidence, is Miguel, who happens to be from Lisbon. So it just felt like it was perfect when we got agreed to do this. And he's going to also be helping with the Lisbon Salon. So thank you very much to Call to Guests. Let's go and have a drink. Let's carry on the row. And let's thank our brilliant panel for being brave and saying so many interesting things. Thank you. I'm sorry I had to be so rude.